All right, we're back with part two now. Arthur Petropoulos here, managing partner at Hillview Partners, M&A, capital advisory, middle market investment banking firm, helping companies generating $1 million to $10 million in EBITDA, sell their companies, secure capital. We are continuing our interview with Daniel Tagliatela here, who's a up-and-coming business entrepreneur, owns a couple businesses, meaningfully growing them, young man that we've worked with in selling one particular business that we were working on and is continuing to grow an interesting business empire, bootstrap, ground up, self-funded, and really an interesting perspective that we can kind of think about juxtaposed to some of the more institutional acquirers of businesses. So we're always happy to work with guys like Daniel and happy that he took the time to join us again here. So I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
I guess the first question we would have is, when you buy a company, just like when we're selling it, we say, yes, the value, the structure, what happens to the employees, but the transition of ownership is always an element of it because the ownership in businesses of this size, we see in the 1 to 10 million range, like they're never entirely not involved with the business. Some are very involved, but there's always an element of how do you kind of transfer that knowledge base from ownership to new ownership? How do you kind of get everybody on board and phase that out without creating disruption? So like when you think of like transition of ownership of a business, obviously we would work on you with you on the window cleaning business, but in the seal coating business, or when you look at any business, how do you think of the transition of ownership? Do you say, hey, I just need you to be around? Is it more, let's work together for some period of time? Or what do you think is the ideal when you're coming in and someone else is kind of leaving the stage?
Well, it has to be specific to you, what skill set you're bringing and how comfortable you feel with everything and kind of what the owner's looking for. And so I would say in my first company, I was 27 when I bought it. I was the youngest person in the company and now I own the company. And everybody's in their 40s and 50s doing, the laborers doing all the work and everything. So it was a
Sure.
huge cultural shock for them to be taking orders from a kid. And I knew that I was going to need this is my first transaction. I had not managed anybody before. I was an analyst at an insurance company doing
Sure.
stocks. So I had never fired anybody or even given orders to anybody to do anything in any sort of authoritative position. So I needed this owner to stay on. And he knew I needed him to stay on, and his plan was to stay on. So it worked out great because his expectations and what I wanted, they perfectly aligned. So we just came up with an agreement. He was going to stay on for a year, for a full
Right.
season. It's a seasonal business, pavement sealing, and he was basically going to sort of slowly transition down as I started to ramp up. And the that's I would say that agreement can be agreed to with anybody. But the point is the owner actually going to do what he said he was going to do in the transition?
Sure.
Or is he going to sign this paper and then bounce? And in
Right.
my case, he more than fulfilled it. I still talk to him maybe like once a year to this day, and he's just gotten a kick out of what we've been able to do with the company. I say I own the whole company, but I have a staff now
Yeah, of
that,
course.
and I have a manager who I sold a little piece of the company to. So now he's a co-owner as well. So what we've been able to do, the prior owner, he just gets a kick out of it. And I think he had a son that was a little older than me who didn't want the company. And so he was in his 60s. So I think he felt like he really wanted to help me out and help me succeed. I'm paying
Sure.
this guy all this money and putting everything I have on the line. And he kind of felt like ethically, so it was great. Whenever I had a question about anything, I just called him. And I called him 5 times a day at first. And then it got down to 4 and then 3. And then I eventually took over. That was my first company. The second one I bought, what was it, last year, April of last year? So I was
Right.
32 or something, 32, 33. I think I was 32. So, and I had already done this once. So the owner of the company you sold me, A&A Window Cleaning, he was a little bit younger too. It was a family company. He was ready to get out for other business ventures that he had going on. We also agreed to a transitionary period, and every time I've called him or texted him or needed him, he's always been available. So I've needed him significantly less
Sure.
than the first business, significantly less than we agreed to. So I ended up paying him a lot more money than I really actually used him for.
Must have had a good
But
banker, but
whatever. So yeah, he must have had a good investment banker. So but he was always available. And, that agreement has run out. I think it was for a year. I can't even
Right.
remember, but something similar like that, a ramp down. And even still, I just texted him the other day about something, and he always answers. So if you're buying a company from like a normal person who's not just a complete jerk, they're going to help you out. They want you to succeed. Again, this is from $1 to $10 million enterprise value from a person you're buying it from.
Sure.
That's
Now, here's a side question because there are a lot of people buying companies now that are in their 30s. And, I started my business when I was 30, and uh, there is an element of difficulty of trying to be diplomatic and respectful for your elders and those that are older than you, but needing to be stern when necessary and kind of getting to the objectives. Did you find that challenging when you started the business? And I always overcompensated by wearing ugly tweed jackets, but did you find that challenging when you got into the business of like being able to give that kind of direction to people and have, whether it's vendors, employees, people, administrators, how, all the elements of the business?
um well, first of all, I'll say you do a good job because I thought you were older than you were. When I talked to Al and he said, Arthur and I, like, we were in the same high school. I was like, you guys went to high school together? I thought Arthur was like in his late, and I'm not saying you look old. I'm saying the tweed jacket is doing its, it's
I'll
doing its
take it.
job. So, it's different because I mean, you're talking about it from the perspective of trying to get clients and stuff like that. For
Sure.
me, coming into these companies, it's my signature on their paycheck. And
Right.
everybody knows that, whether I'm 27 or 47. So as long as you're nice and you just tell everybody this is what we're doing in here, you do get pushback, but it's less than, I had an employee the first year of my first company. He was in his 60s, and he ended up retiring after the first season. He wasn't going to listen to a 27-year-old, into his 60s. So
Sure.
that was fine. But during that year, he was okay. I mean, he got all the work done. We had a few situations where he got frustrated with me, but as long as I knew I was not asking anything outside of the scope of his job and I was being reasonable, then it's just like, hey, I mean, this is what your job is. I mean, he just
Yeah.
didn't like it, but I think a lot it goes a long way to just be very calm and sort of nice and not raise your voice at people. I've never yelled at an employee or anything. I mean, because ultimately I have the hammer and I don't need to I can smack it when I want to, and it can be very calmly, and
Yeah.
it still accomplishes the same thing.
Yes. I agree with that. And I guess to that point, kind of pivoting from ownership more to the employees, do you find any particular approach best, or when you step into a company in terms of retention? 'Cause I think a lot of acquirers, there's always this twofold concern. I know we were chatting about it before we started. That one concern is that everybody's going to uh, run away, or kind of just disband. And then the other concern is that there's going to be kind of a mutiny against you, where everyone just starts to hold out for more. But what's the best way you've found in kind of approaching just kind of the rank and file of saying, okay, here's how we're going to run the business, and getting things in the right momentum after you close a deal?
There's a period of time for a couple of months where everybody's very nervous about what does this mean for them and their lives and their job. And I don't necessarily even mean they're worried about losing their job, although everybody's curious about what this new owner is going to do and if it's going to impact their job, but also just their day-to-day work. Like, is their life going to change? Are they going to have to come in at a different time? Am I going to
Sure.
start, making changes to the type of work they're doing and putting them in a different position? So you have this period of time for a couple of months where everyone's sort of just like holding their breath. And in that period of time, I have found it best with both of my acquisitions to show them that it's just status quo,
Sure.
that initially we're trying to make as little changes as possible. And even after initially, the ideal situation is you're not making any changes because you found out during this couple of months that everything's going great. And that happened in my first company, I would say, to a certain extent. In the second company, less so. There was a little more turnover, voluntary and involuntary. And but you just roll with it. I mean, you understand that um, these people are relying on you and you're relying on them. And so it's sort of this like mutually assured destruction that kind of keeps everybody on their best behavior. And your job is the new owner is not really to mess that up. It's
No,
really to make sure that you're trying to assess their performance and they're trying to assess how you're going to treat them. And I've had good experience with as long as I'm treating people fairly and not asking anything crazy out of them, just do your job, that they respond to that very well. And I also think there is an element, though, of your personality. If you're an excitable person, you're going to excite people around you. And if you're a
yeah,
calm person, you'll have a calming effect on people. And I tend to be, I don't want to say calmer, but a little bit more stoic in the
sure.
sense where I think I feel more like a rock to
Yeah,
people. And so there's a confidence that I think they have around it. So.
yeah. Is there anything that people told you would be important when you started buying companies that didn't tend to be as important, or that you said like, boy, I just read about this thing being significant. Like, I always found in business, because you'd always read about in like management classes, like the importance of like these like annual reviews and stuff like that. And what I found is like it matters, but it doesn't matter like the length and depth of it. Like people would rather have a more frequent check-in that's a little less formal as just kind of like an attaboy or like, hey, we're doing the right things here, than these wait for the end of the year and then we're going to sit down and go through like, Porter's five forces and your capabilities or all this stuff. So
Right.
I was always eye-opening to me, but anything in your business ownership that you said, you know what, you took a slightly different view towards something or it wasn't as, rigid or academic of an exercise?
I would say just before I answer the question that just to give a scale or a scope, I mean, I have between the two companies almost 40, maybe 40 employees, and
Wow.
each of these businesses has a manager that runs it kind of day to day. With A&A, the window cleaning company, I'm still involved day to day as my manager is getting up to speed. It's been about 6 months at the time of this interview, so he's largely taken on a lot of the day to day operations in Connecticut with my ceiling company. He's completely taken over and he's a part owner now. So um, that's sort of the size of the company I'm working with, about 40 people, and most of them are laborers.
Sure.
Um, I don't do any sort of that type of formality, performance reviews, stuff like that, or anything on a regular interval. If I see something's not right, when I was managing the companies directly with employees, we address it like that day. And if it's not that day, it's the next day because you left earlier before I could talk to you that day. And so everybody has a very real time um, idea of how they're doing. And I tend to not let things linger for any longer than, a week or something.
Sure.
So yeah, a lot of those formal corporate processes, I don't have any. I mean, we kind of operate these companies like guerrilla warfare. It's whatever. We're scrappy, and
Yeah.
so if you as the manager need to drop down into the ceiling tank to unclog some sand that got stuck in the bottom or whatever, you're doing it,
Yeah.
and we're doing it now. We're not doing it a day from now or anything. So
Yes.
it's a very high touch, intense way of managing. Um, and maybe that's only possible in a small company. But what I found is that bigger companies, like when I was at Amica, they had, I don't know, 1,500 people on that campus. Bigger companies are just collections of smaller departments. And
Yes.
so, I mean, most departments are not more than 100 people. And if you have 100 people, it's probably four groups of 25. So you really are never managing more than like 20 or 30 people at a time. That's a small company.
Yeah.
So if corporate has some directive where you have to do these things, you've got to do them. But everybody knows that they don't need to be done, and
Yeah.
nobody likes doing them either.
Yeah.
So it's just sort of this disconnect. So the question you asked me about things that people told me I had to do or not, I wouldn't say I do any of that type of stuff, and I'd say that people really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And with my manager at A&A, he started talking to me about how he had to do like a budgeting process, and it took him like 8 weeks in November to like do this budgeting. And he was like, I was counting paper clips and stuff, and I was like, well, I'm not going to have you do any of that. I mean, here's the budget. Every time you spend money, try and get things for as cheap as possible without compromising the quality. And if you do that at every single purchase you make, and you're saying, okay, well, if I get this cheaper, am I sacrificing the quality? Okay, yes. So maybe I'll go with the better version this time because